So this is what I want to explain is that it's basically a matrix, and it's a matrix to identify the 4 points, but there's some analogness to the matrix. So there's in between. Let me actually just draw it out. Something like this. So we can put on top recovery, and on the side we can put startup. This is low, this is high. Where should we start? High startup, high recovery. So that's uptime counter. Actually, I'm gonna put UC, uptime counter. There's many things you can do out of this, that's why, but there's gonna be an optimal solution here. So you could do uptime counter, you could just do parry, you can parry. So like perfect guard. I'll call it perfect guard because it's basically a parry. Perfect guard, and then follow up, perfect guard into some follow up. What else can you do? Dodge, you can dodge, right? You just dodge. Or repo, you can reposition and punish. What else can you do? Or iframe. You like these give you the most options. You can do whatever the fuck you want, right? So at a very basic understanding of the game, like if you're a beginner, it really doesn't fucking matter what you do. You just play somewhat decently, avoid the attack, and you can do anything. Now, if you're trying to become advanced, right, and you're trying to go for optimization, your job is for your weapon and your given situation in the hunt, so typically positioning, like where you're facing and where you are XY, like distance related to the monster, and when that attack makes contact with you, you're trying to figure out what the best punish is to optimize damage. So for a high here, typically the best thing to do is this right here, uptime counter. This shit. Actually, I'm gonna put it in red. It's actually very important. This is why people don't understand about the game. This is where people's understanding of the game is very, very elementary. This typically does the most damage most of the time. Now, you have to actually take into account hit zone values ultimately if you're really, really breaking it down. Because typically when you do uptime counter, like if the monster's attacking with its forearms or its head, the only thing you can uptime counter is usually its torso or its back legs or its tail. But generally, depending on the amount of uptime you get, that total damage you get is actually, it's going to outdo the amount of damage you could get from compared to like a perfect guard response and then punish response or a repo. Honestly, the repo is actually, yeah, perfect guard or repo. Repo, typically you want to repo and then hit the weak spot because you're spending time to repo, because you're choosing not to spend the time to actually do uptime counter. You're actually choosing the time to do a reposition. All right, so typically it's uptime counter. Now let's look at, just go to the next cell. What can you do out of a low startup, high recovery? Typically these are not as common, right? Typically if it's a low startup, it's going to have low recovery, but there are some moves with the exceptions have low startup, high recovery, as well as low recovery and high startup. One example of low recovery, maybe Rathian's dive. I don't know. Again, it's not going to be like perfect, right? There's still some analogness. You can still, like, it can kind of blend into these cells. Like it could lie here, it could lie here, it could lie here, or it could lie here. It's like a spectrum. So, okay, here's it going. Low startup, high recovery. So I'm trying to think of a move here. And typically these low startup, high recovery, or low recovery, high startup, they're usually like the moves that throw you off. They're there to throw you off. They're really there to kind of fuck with you. The issue with low startup, high recovery is reaction time is typically a factor. In Monster Hunter, reaction time is really not that much of a factor, but it's usually more of a monster knowledge problem, because if you're trying to just go off of pure reaction time, you're not using something that you can fully leverage, which is monster knowledge, right? So if you're able to, if a person with monster knowledge is able to ID the move because they know like a certain way the monster like moves its left nut, it has a tell, right? And only through monster knowledge can you know those tells. And if you can know those tells, you can actually react faster than someone who's just trying to go off reaction, right? So that's where monster knowledge comes in. And that's a big thing in Monster Hunter is monster knowledge. And that's kind of why you can make the game much easier on yourself through monster knowledge. Low startup, high recovery. So you cannot uptime counter it. Yeah, you cannot uptime counter it. You can repo, you can perfect guard. Again, if you know the tell through monster knowledge. Some monsters are very tricky. Like they have really low time to figure out what the tell is. That they're quite tricky, and those are the hardest moves, obviously. And you can iframe and respawn and punish. You cannot uptime counter though, because you need the high startup to uptime counter. You need the high startup because that's the definition of uptime counter. It's attacking while the monster is doing his wind up and his active frames. So let's take this case, low recovery but high startup. Actually, a good example of this, low recovery, high startup, is Rathian Tailspin. It's a very good one because his active frames are very long, right? So you can just literally sit between a Rathian's legs while it's doing the 360 tailspin and just tickle its nuts the whole time it's doing that. But the recovery after it finishes that second tailspin is very low. Well, it's not super low, but it's low relative to the amount of uptime that you get. So this is uptime counter. You could perfect guard that specific move, but you could do like a light perfect guard, with a light response. So I'm gonna put perfect guard, but in lowercase. You get your perfect guard and like maybe something like a sword and shield perfect guard into counter slash. Very light response, but also very strong response for the amount. Very strong damage wise for the amount of time it takes. It's a very high DPS move. Something like a charge blade perfect guard into savage axe rise is actually kind of wouldn't qualify. It takes a little bit too much time, I think, and you would actually get punished with a move that has low recovery. So that you have to. It really depends on the response and the total time for that response. So I'm gonna put a light perfect guard, maybe. Repo. Maybe a light repo, maybe, depending on the move. Something like greatsword could not do this, could not do a repo, and then because your fastest move is draw slash, right? Maybe an offset slash could qualify, but that would qualify as perfect guard or parry. Because remember here, perfect guard I'm counting as like a parry. The modality is parry, right? It's parrying. Maybe a light iframe, Yeah, because it's low recovery, you don't have that much time to punish after you iframe, especially if the active frames are towards the end, the trail end of the move. All right, let's do the last cell. Dude, honestly, this is a really fucking good video. I might actually chop this up and put it on YouTube. All right, last. Low startup, low recovery. These are moves. Arkveld has a lot of these moves. For example, headbutt. Headbutt is a very good example. Let's just take the headbutt. He has a lot of different ones as well, but you absolutely cannot uptime counter these. You absolutely cannot. To try, you're probably gonna get hit in recovery though. So you cannot uptime counter. Light perfect guard, or light parry. So offset perfect guard with a light response after. Repo, light repo, maybe. Like I'm trying to think for headbutt, could you repo and get a good punish? Maybe, just maybe. It's even less light repo. Same with iframe. Maybe you iframe it and get like a small hit, but it's even less than these. Like I would even make it smaller. Honestly, perfect guard is your best option. That's like the amount of damage. It's like it still qualifies as perfect guard. Like here, I would put like very tiny repo and maybe an iframe. Maybe just very tiny. You could maybe get 1 or 2 hits in after dual blades after you iframe it. Maybe you can see. So your best option here is perfect guard. Is your parries, your light responses to your parries. You absolutely cannot do an uptime counter on these moves. Maybe if the monster was like hitting, had aggro and was facing a different target, then you could get some uptime there. But for all intents and purposes, we're assuming it's single player, right? No, it's just you versus the monster. What is the actual highest, the best option for here? Is it perfect guard? Is it repo? Or is it iframe? Depends on the weapon, really. For like dual blades, you're just obviously gonna do repo, right? Or no, you're probably gonna iframe or repo, whichever gives you the most damage. I feel like these are all equal. It really depends on the weapon, so I would do something like this. Because like some weapons don't have access to repositioning unless they have heavy investment in like I love the evade window. So you can see this is why for a majority of the moves in this matrix, uptime counter is a very big source of damage if you're trying to optimize. It's a very big source of damage. And now in the game, because you can use focus mode to always face the monster at all times, you can always put yourself in perfect guard. So you can effortlessly blend your response and depending on what the monster throws at you, because you can face the monster at all times, you can perfect guard for the next move. Like depending on whatever move the monster throws at you, you have options. You can do uptime countering, like getting in that damage during the startup or the active frames. If it's a low recovery, low startup, typically a perfect guard. There's a lot of very strong perfect guard moves I can do out of that. And your whole goal, if you're trying to play at a high level, is to look at all these moves and determine the best response, typically on a reaction as well, because you're trying to decide on what to do very quickly, like within milliseconds off of reaction based on the cues, the startup frame the monster throws at you. But basically, when you look at this chart, like the combination of the recovery and the startup is making the move lie somewhere in this matrix, right? You're trying to figure out based on how you grade and evaluate each move what your response is going to be, and it's going to follow something like this matrix here. Okay, so what was the thing I wanted to explain here? Well, okay, looking at this, like all his startups are like 3 stars, so they're actually, honestly, these are all soft counter opportunities. You just reposition and then just quickly reposition. Obviously, it's going to depend on your absolute positioning at the time, because like if you're super far away, then having to gap close, like it's not going to give you enough wide uptime countering. But if you're close enough, typically you can just like sidestep, and like some weapons have like instant glaive as Repositioning moves can also attack at the same time that allow you to get uptime. Stay safe from the attack and also get in damage. Fade slashes, charge blade has the different fade slash in every single direction. Like any weapon with movement capabilities with simultaneous attacking, sliding swipe, for example, or in shield, demon flurry rush for dual blades. Like all of these repositioning and simultaneous attacking are good candidate moves to start for counterattacking for uptime. And you can see with like even these 3-star startups, you can actually, especially with those weapons that have those moving simultaneous attacking moves, they can you can get that damage in, which constitute counter. So like this could even be yes for nearly everything for Chatacabra, and you can actually play Chatacabra like that. Like for example, charge blade in Savage Axe mode, that's literally all you're doing. You're literally playing, you're trying to get full counter uptime for all of his moves, because you can flinch free through a lot of his moves, as well as move while attacking with a lot of the Y attacks plus control stick, right? Y attacks plus control stick allow you to do fade slashes backwards as well as dash slam going forward, and that's all keeping uptime. But the key is you need 3-star to 5-star startup to do that. If this is 2-star or lower, you cannot counter. One, you don't have enough reaction time to start your attack and get the attack off, but also typically the move has low recovery that you'll be stuck in your animation and the monster will be fully recovered and actually attack you out of your attack, right?